Welcome to our session, New Actors in the Transformation to Electric Cars, Challenges from Chinese Battery Manufacturers. My name is Schneidemesser, and I am lecturer at the Universität Erfurt, as well as the Weizenbaum Institute in Berlin, and I will moderate the session. At the end of the session, there will be time for discussion. Questions can be directly asked in this room from the audience. The online audience, we ask to send questions via the chat. These will be passed on to us. So Chinese investments, how would they be linked to investments in Germany and in Europe? We see a very important link, which rarely is discussed. And today we would like to use the example of the automotive industry to discuss this. The transformation to e-cars does not only change a lot regarding working processes, but the structure of the automotive industry. Because of the new engines, the suppliers are under pressure. At the same time, new companies enter the value chain. It's specifically companies from China that are playing a growing role in Germany as well as in Europe. And there's a new competitive situation in the market for e-cars and core components. These could be battery cells and battery packs from Chinese suppliers. It was just 2 weeks ago that new figures were announced by the China consulting agency called Synalytics. This was on how much Chinese automaker sales abroad have increased internationally. Geely and Chery could double their sales. BYD's overseas sales rose by 43%. Battery manufacturers are now opening different production facilities at various locations in Europe and become important suppliers to the European automotive industry. In Germany, battery factories are being built in Erfurt, this is CATL, in Göttingen, Gotion, and in Brandenburg and Saarland, this is Eswald. Why are Chinese companies so strong in the market? And what does this mean for trade union work and the works councils? And I have 4 guests with which I would like to discuss this. We have Stefan Schmalz. He heads a research group at the University of Erfurt. He focuses on conflicts over Chinese investments in Germany. On the other side, we have Romy Siegert. She is a trade union secretary and works in the field of transnational trade union, the policy department of the IG Metall. She is responsible for Asia and supervises a network of works councils which work in German companies with Chinese investors. We have Pahmeier and André Merder. They are works council members at the Göttingen site of the Gotion German Battery GmbH, which is the first international production facility of the Chinese battery manufacturer Gotion. And that's why they can give a first-hand account of what it actually means to work for a Chinese company that is becoming internationally active in the field of e-mobility. I would like to start with the question that goes to you, Stefan. How is it that Chinese companies are so leading in battery production, and how does this affect the working world in Germany as well as in Europe? The volume is very low. It is very difficult to hear what is being said by the speaker in the interpreting booth. That is why, unfortunately, no interpretation can take place. The volume of the speaker has to be increased, please. Now, so there would be names like CATL, the market leader, Gotion, so Chinese companies, but also Korean companies like Samsung and Japanese companies like Panasonic. Several reasons. The first is quite trite. The electro industry for years now has been working with batteries, like for cell phones, for smartphones, and this is located in Asia, East Asia. So it's not the typical automotive industry setting. And there also would be political reasons. In China, this has been massively promoted via 5-year plans incentives for purchasing, and Europe just missed out on this for a long period of time to become politically active. It expresses its way primarily in the fact that the German and European manufacturers do not have a lot of production knowledge, even if they may hold patents as to how this works. They're just in the process of learning. The other aspect would be that added value would be depleted. A battery is a quarter of the value of a car, which is a lot, and the European and German car manufacturers are not in a good position. Now, the question is, why do the Chinese companies now all come here? Well, in 2035, in Europe, we will not have gas-fueled cars anymore. It's an important market, one of the most important growth markets. So the Chinese manufacturers primarily focus on this market here because in the US, they have massive problems because of reservations against Chinese companies. So many Chinese companies go to Europe as well, and other Asian manufacturers focus more on America. LG is a Korean company, which now has a location in Poland, for example, but these are big production plans. The CATL in Erfurt is 1.8 billion worth, and they planned to invest another 7 billion in Hungary. So that these are major investments. And of course, the European Union, as well as the German government, increasingly try to support domestic companies. Projects of common European interests are promoted. So groups that manufacture batteries are being supported. The Chinese companies pursue different strategies. Some, like CATL, which is a market leader, simply come here and manufacture their products and are very, how to put this, open and straightforward. Others like Gotion, which is 8th worldwide, try to seek cooperation with Volkswagen, for example. And as many of you know, Volkswagen with PowerCo tries to develop their own battery plants. There are different ways of cooperation. What does that mean for the trade unions? And this is my last point. Of course, there are new actors and it's a new industry. And the matter of the fact is that compared to previous investments of the Chinese, these are greenfield investments, so very new investments, and it's Chinese production knowledge. These companies are primarily in private hands, and there's not really a culture of co-determination. So these are challenges for trade unions. It's challenging to set up a works council. Maybe it can be compared to the situation with Tesla. Second aspect is the qualification. This is not the typical skilled labor work we know from the automotive industry. Oftentimes, this is labor that just went to a very brief training. It's a different group of people working there, which is relevant for the work and trade unions. Of course, there still are skilled laborers as well. And there would be white collar workers, but it's a different structure. And lastly, there are labor policy topics that are important, like, for example, health. Even though this is a very automated production, there are manual processes involved with a lot of repetitive movements. Then, of course, fire protection is important because chemicals would be involved. And I think maybe others in the panel can say more about that than I can. Thank you very much. I would like to continue with you, Romy. So this market development and the labor policy topics that were just sketched by Stefan, what does that mean for trade union policies? And when it comes to the new Chinese companies, what are your activities? Thank you, Leah. Thank you, Stefan, for the introduction. The situation is this. We see two phenomena from the perspective of trade unions, and I would like to elaborate on both. We have the acquisitions of Chinese companies, not the greenfield ones, but also the acquisition of already existing companies, and this is something that we have seen for a longer time. In 2016, this was the high point regarding the volume of investments in Germany and Europe. Ever since 2022, or rather in 2022, the situation was that for the first time, the greenfield investments that China had in Europe and Germany would excel the brownfield investments. And we as IG Metall have more experience in the analysis and what it is that we can do via our trade union members working in the companies in the already existing brownfield acquisition. This is what I would like to talk about first, and I would like to describe some of the insights. And in a second step, I would like to talk about first preliminary experience that we as trade unions made regarding these greenfield investments. For more than 10 years now in IG Metall, there's a so-called China Invest network in which colleagues working in the companies that have Chinese investors can participate in. They have regular meetings and a regular exchange, and they network. And above all, they have an exchange going on regarding company-related topics and can seek advice. A second part of our activities would be the exchange on political, trades, and societal topics. So we, as the heads of seminars, oftentimes promote the development of opinions and emphasizing the importance and the impact of Chinese investments for colleagues in these companies. This is what we would like to further and promote. I would like to share some of the insights from this network. Chinese investors have normally a more long-term investment in comparison to other international investors. If we take a look at activist investors from the US or Switzerland, this is different. Oftentimes they make heavy investments into German sites. The reason for these investments that we have seen in the past years would first of all be technological transfer. Stefan just talked about greenfield investments, and that here production knowledge and production means from China would be introduced here. Then other reasons, however, could also be market access in Germany and the European Union. Made in Germany, this label, this slogan in China still represents quality and promotes sales of products in China. Also familiarizing themselves with the European and German management structures, this is something Chinese investors are keenly interested in. There are some challenges I briefly would like to touch upon. Oftentimes, there's not a high level of interest or knowledge of the German co-determination structures and the labor relationships on behalf of the Chinese investors. And it is not possible for the works councils to develop relationships with the Chinese investors. And in the case of a conflict, this can be a drawback, but I also would like to emphasize that it's not always the case. There are also good labor relationships between German members of the Works Council and the Chinese investors. Oftentimes, Chinese investors or investments, the German managers keep their jobs, and there's an additional Chinese manager, which then takes over the communication with the main company. Then, if it's about the communication between the Works Council and the Chinese investors, this is absolutely pivotal. But it is something that is not very transparent to us. Are the two parties influence on so that they work against each other? This has happened. If the work worked well with the German investors of the company, then oftentimes it continues to work. If it's not the case and poor relationships are the result, then this could also be a possible situation. In principle, we can say that the Chinese investors comply with German law and German customs. If existing co-determination structures are already enshrined in the company, then this will be continued. So collective bargaining in many cases would be continued. These agreements would be continued. The binding continues, or they have been negotiated for several years into the future. But this takes us to a bit of an issue. What is the situation when it comes to greenfield investments, which take place in Germany more often in recent times? And this is what we will focus on today. At the beginning, there are some more general topics I would like to talk about. The Chinese investors, if we take a look at the global situations, work with the situation on site, but other internationally working companies do this as well, just as German companies if they invest abroad. If we talk about labor standards, for example, an example could be that Chinese companies like to bring along their Chinese staff to other countries, and then it depends on the different countries what the legal framework is. If we take a look at the African continent, or if we take a look at Hungary, which is not that far away, a very large proportion of Chinese staff is brought along. And the first experience in Germany has demonstrated that it would not be as many staff members they bring along, but they do bring them abroad. Just as with regards to other international companies, they are not absolutely happy, enthusiastic if trade union representatives, for example, knock at their door, but they're really not different from other international investors. So this makes us face major challenges. How would the Chinese companies act and behave in Germany if it's about establishing co-determination structures in the company? So we are collecting our experience and practice. So our analysis more or less takes place on the meter level, and we're not in, we cannot really say anything about that yet because this analysis has not been concluded yet. Then I would like to talk about 2 or 3 cases from practice experience, because of course our colleagues also study these companies now, and it's similar to what Stefan said. The training, qualification, and the development of production systems would be in line with what is done in Chinese companies. So we do see that there is a need to have co-determination structures in place because the labor conditions currently are not really ideal. And maybe I can leave it at that. Thank you very much. Now, I would like to refer to our experts from practice. Till, maybe my first question goes to you. Actually, it's 2 questions, because in 2022, there was a takeover of your company by Gotion. So how did that happen? How did this takeover come about? Why is Gotion interested in you? And maybe you can also tell me more about the topics that Romy mentioned and how they play a role for you in your works council work. Well, I think this requires some explanation. We are a company or a work site that is more than 70 years old. Back then, we were an affiliate of a Bosch company in Hildesheim when we were founded. And then for 70 years, we were managed by Bosch. Up until 2016, we negotiated a collective bargaining agreement, and then we completed this in 2017 with investment guarantees as well as guarantees how they would like to act in the production. We dispensed with additional money, and unfortunately we had to say goodbye to a large part of our staff. And then Bosch really didn't take a lot of action. I don't want to say that they didn't live up to what they promised, but they were not able to implement this.
So we are producing lithium-ion batteries for combustion engines, and they started to contact Gotion. And Gotion was looking for a production site for standard batteries, so we discussed whether we should do a joint venture or whether Bosch should manufacture the batteries. And then they thought, well, you know, Chinese, they like to own instead of having a joint venture or rent. And this is why they said, okay, we're going to take over the business. It was not that easy because the contract that we concluded was not designed for a sale of the company. Bosch and us, if we had known that this was going to be a topic for discussion, we both would have negotiated differently. This was really fully integrated into the Bosch structures, etc. So we tried to negotiate with Bosch and with Gotion. Nobody was allowed back then to say who the potential investor is, and that was pretty difficult. But we managed to kind of negotiate a couple of things. Otherwise, this would not have worked out. As Works Council members, we realized that Bosch was choosing a different approach when it comes to the continued existence of its sites in Germany and our site in particular. And therefore, we said we see a bigger opportunity with a new technology. The technology is something André will speak about in a minute, and also about the product. So we wanted to make this site future-proof, and this is why we were in support. There was a share deal, and we were in a position to, for long-term, agree on our works agreement and could therefore also preserve our site and the jobs there. And with our employee representatives on site, we also negotiated on an equal footing. And this is what has remained. Major problems are, though, mostly triggered by cultural differences and problems of understanding. For example, if we insist on specific topics, the investors don't know why we are doing this, because it's just different, because they see it from a different vantage point. So you always have to bear this in mind and have to also spend or waste a thought on this. You can't just, insist, and you cannot really make the investor lose his face. The situation is not as bad as that, and this is why we are saving this for later, if it really turns out to be bad. So it was already mentioned, we are kind of a mix of a green and brownfield investment. We have an existing site with existing products, and now, by the end of next year, we will have completely eliminated the legacy products, and the battery production is going to be what the site is running on. So nobody before has ever manufactured batteries, and this is the first battery that has now been manufactured. So the specifics still had to be established. Gotion wanted to enter the market quickly, so we supplied to OEMs. We were certified. We were capable of doing this, and they said that before we do a greenfield investment with a lot of subsidies, they could have received way more subsidies if they had done a greenfield investment. But they said, no, we go where people are able to do this, and then we'll get this done together. So we are then going to commission the first production facility, but it's going to take some time until this is up and running. So have I spoken for long enough? Yes, sure. Thank you very much. I would now like to hand over to André in order to learn more about the technological transformation, because this is not only a change of ownership, which is very often the case in brownfield investment cases, but it's a completely new product. And it's also entailing fundamental changes in the production process. So how was this done so far? And then how far is Gotion a good partner in this transformation? Currently, we are in a totally interesting phase. We had the challenge that on the one hand, we were still manufacturing Bosch products, and it was our aim to take everybody on board and not lose any employees so that there is no idle time in the production. And it was very important for us to have a good transition. So therefore, the Bosch production had to decrease, and at the same time, the battery production, the new production, had to increase. And before we could actually produce the batteries, we first of all had to upskill our employees. As was said by the previous speaker, we had never assembled a battery before. We are not familiar with the product. We don't know the processes. So the challenge still is that we need to really manage to train all our employees. And I believe that Gotion was a good partner. There were training programs in China. Employees got invited to China. They spent a long time in China, even during COVID. They were trained and they got to know about the product, about the group, and this was very valuable for us. And on the other hand, the products that we have manufactured so far were a component of an ICE. And since the founding of the company for more than 50 years, we have been producing this. And we have employees that have worked for the company for 30 years, and they knew this off by heart. They could really, do this while asleep. They have also high manual manufacturing shares, and now we need to try and transition to a battery, a product with completely different risks and dangers because of the electricity involved and high voltages. And therefore, especially since the acquisition last year, a lot was invested in training and skilling our employees when it comes to those risks and dangers. We had manual manufacturing before, and now we are switching over to an automated manufacturing concept. And this is why we really need to take into account many different aspects. But, to be honest, I think it's something we are doing pretty well. A lot of money is invested, and there are employees that are exempted from their regular duties so that they can train, and we are reaching the limits of our capacities. We have so many orders by Bosch, and we are reducing those manufacturing capacities, and we really need to produce on stock. And then all of a sudden our customers tell us, oh, we need a little bit more. And at the same time, we need to give employees some time so that they can train for the new product. This is happening right now, and we already manufactured the first battery. We have the first customer orders, and part of the Bosch production is expiring towards the end of the year, and part of the battery production is now starting. And this is why we are in the process of managing both. Yes, so thank you very much to all of you for your different perspectives on Chinese investment and e-mobility. And I believe that we have really illustrated the connection between Chinese investment and the socio-ecological transformation. And I would now, because we have plenty of time left, open the discussion. And I would also like to invite questions from the audience. Maybe I can start right here, and then we will just collect questions. And I think we need another microphone. I am from Hans Böckler Foundation. Jennifer is my name. I found it so interesting to find out about the qualification or upskilling of employees with Gotion battery. And I have questions on this. And it was also said that employees that have not been doing anything other than for 20 or 30 years than working with the old production processes, and they would have to be reskilled entirely. And did you actually see barriers or hurdles when it comes to having to learn something new? And how did you manage this so that the employees were really taken by the hand, if you will, in order to skill them for a completely new production process? I suggest we collect 2 or 3 questions, and whoever wants to say something can go ahead. Christine Schmidt from the Institute of Occupational Training Research in Berlin. I am coordinating COMBI, a project for the establishment of qualifications for battery manufacturing. Therefore, my question is, how many workers are we talking about? And what was offered to them in terms of training programs? Yes, maybe you can pass on the microphone to the next person. Johannes Schulz, ERQ from Duisburg and Essen. The first question has already been asked. I am also asking about the payroll, so the number of people employed, and do you also have development perspectives for your employees? Is there kind of a stagnation, or will they be able to have a career? And then this was addressed a couple of times. It was a simpler task before, and it's highly automated by comparison to the Bosch world that existed before. So maybe you can tell us a little bit about this means for the pay group. Will you have lower pay groups for people than before? How about the Works Council and collective bargaining agreement and the coverage? So maybe you can tell us a little bit more about this. Yes, I think this is a good fit. So first of all, I would like to hand back to you, especially when it comes to those qualification or upskilling questions. Let me start. Let me say something. Oh, now it is working. My microphone is working again and I'm audible. So let me say that we have an average age in our workforce. We were not sure before we discussed this, but we have an average age of 50 in our workforce. So maybe learning sometimes is not so easy. But I still have the feeling that all our colleagues are highly motivated because they see a future for themselves. We have to be fair. You know, for Bosch, as a works council, we did not see any future. You know, there was no investment, even though we had a guarantee of existence until 2027. But, you know, we were thinking about having to negotiate about the closure of our site by 2027. But now it's different. There is a lot of investment. Employees are motivated. But I can also sense some fears. You know, the high voltage training, there are many levels that we have to go through, and there are some, depending on their basic education and training, are qualified in a different way. You know, parts have to go somewhere for education every week, sometimes every 2 to 3 weeks, and you don't just go there, but you have to pass the test. So these are major requirements, really. And so far, it has been the goal of having 2/3 or half of our workforce trained by the end of the year. And so far, everybody was successful. There was nobody where we said, oh, no, we can't ask this from them. So everybody who went through training could also pass the test. And we have a very good training program. We have external companies that are training us, but we also have a big training department, and we also involved those master craftspeople. This means that they get an electrical engineering basic course in our training program, and they also accompany our electricians in maintenance so that they get a feel for the future job. And I believe all in all, we have a good mix of external upskilling measures and internal or in-house measures. Maybe you would like to add? Yeah, we have 230 or 240 employees. Per training year, we have 10 trainers, so we have a pretty high rate. This is something that we also agreed on in our agreement back then. And, you know, the training for our colleagues involves 5 people that are having a day off from manufacturing for 1 day, and they do a basic course in our training workshop in electrical engineering, because we will have battery packs that have more than 60 volts, 160 volts. That's not a big problem when it comes to occupational safety, but so below 60 volts, it's not a problem, but from 60 volts upwards, it's really dangerous. So we might have to rediscuss this with Gotion so that they can change their manufacturing. You could also do this differently, that they are assembled later or connected later, and then only at a later stage, this high voltage levels apply. But so far, we have no product design in our site, even though this is something which is also in the pipeline. We had to master craftsmen. One is remaining with us, and the other one decided to go to a different company for personal reasons. And they did this high voltage training, but they did not do any extra qualification or training because for many years they've been involved in training programs, and it's basically about electrical engineering and nothing new for them. But maybe it's wrong, but we might discuss this later on, whenever problems arise. Let me add, teaching or training personnel, we have one part in our training department, and then we also have the others that accompany the electricians in our company. They normally would repair machines or be in charge of our in-house power lines. And what they do is they just try to chaperone them through the company and try to show them their work. And everybody's trying to support each other, and I find this is really remarkable because most people are afraid. For the past 30 years they've only assembled one thing, and they might not really be willing to start something new. Those were our concerns, my concerns, and this is something I can't really see right now. So one more thing, because of the high voltage training, I partly see in that area that we have a better qualification. And this means that after that, they would have higher pay groups they would be qualifying for. But we have not yet reached that stage. I think at the moment, at least, we don't have low pays that are a problem, because we also have additional remuneration that comes on top because of the products we produce. And this is why we don't really have so low pay groups our workforce is in. Do you have more questions? And are there questions from the online chat? Because so far I cannot see any questions. Okay, one comment I would like to briefly make. I think the example shows very nicely how important co-determination structures are, because you are having a watchful eye on everything, and you try to check whether things work or not. And when it comes to Gotion, I think, first of all, training seems to be a positive aspect. One more element of feedback from the experience from the trade union representatives in charge, sometimes in greenfield investments, only the production element that you are actually working on is trained. This is the only thing that the employees can learn. And when it comes to occupational work and safety, very often it does not work that well as it does in your example. Okay, are there more questions? Because in the online chat, I cannot see any questions. So I have a question over here in the hall and another one over there. University of Technology in Guangzhou. We did some research in China on this. My comment on Gotion, we visited you and we also looked at your situation. You are the exception because you are not really producing any battery cells for cars. That was my state of knowledge from back then. If I understand this correctly, this is about AC systems for ambient air conditioning, but this means it's a very special product, very specific product that's going to be introduced in your company. But when it comes to mass manufacturing of battery cells, the situation is different. Actually, these are the greenfield sites that we are actually talking about, which are currently not up and running, but they are still in the construction phase. For example, in Erfurt and elsewhere. But there you can see that the Chinese working model, the way we know it, is copied one-to-one in those sites. And the essence of the Chinese working model is that there is no qualified skilled labor in the sense of the German or European system. There are engineers on the one hand, they have all the knowledge. Also, when it comes to the maintenance and the construction and the design of facilities, and then there is qualified work, mostly not in the production, because the production is mostly completely automated, but in the field of packaging or when it comes to producing battery packages. The point I am making here is that from my perspective, in the Chinese model, there is room for skilled labor, and that is my point. In China, manufacturers have major problems sourcing all those engineers they would need in order to operate the facilities they don't have. And on the other hand, they are not training the assembly line workers to do that. So at a larger scale, when it comes to the greenfield investment that is waiting for us, I believe that there is an approach or a point where trade unions can come in, provided that these companies have unionized workers. Okay, let me now take the two questions that come from our online audience. One would be the question about cultural differences to you, and then also, what are the toughest challenges, or where did you experience this most? Second question, to do with Volkswagen. There is a program, or they are considering to work on barriers or hurdles when it comes to this transition phase. So do you have something like this for the managers or for the production workers? So I would like to try and let the panelists answer, and then we can take more questions over coffee.
So talking about the reservations against learning, well, we had no other option. We were very happy to be people working for Bosch, and many still are very attached to Bosch. So we also found that Bosch had a good, let me call this internal marketing. In the past years, this has been crumbling a bit, but I do not want to go into too much depth here. Just wanted to mention it on the side. The other question was about cultural differences, right? Yes. I think André can say more about that because he spent 6 weeks in China. Well, there's one more aspect. We do manufacture car vehicle batteries or car batteries for energy systems, and this is what the range has been developed for. And now talking about the cultural differences, we do notice this also in the way that the machines are designed and constructed. They were designed in China, and we had an influence on this though, and there are differences regarding the ergonomics, which for us is very important. And the other side also says that this is important, but I think we just have differing understanding. What would ergonomics be for us versus what it is for the colleagues? This is just a feeling that I have. Sometimes in a discussion, it is difficult to create an understanding as to why, for example, we have different fire protection regulations than in China. I recall a discussion with their manager who said that he had to fight for receiving money to implement fire protection rules. And they said they didn't need this in China. They do not have sprinkler systems. They said, why do we need it here? We just don't need it. So that there are these cultural things over and over again. The biggest barrier, in my opinion, actually is language. Few people here speak Chinese, and few of the Chinese speak German within the company. So that the communication aspect is relevant. It is difficult to communicate, but that's what we're working at. Yes, and a big difference is that a lot happens on a one-on-one personal level in China, that is. And we are more professionally distanced. And my feeling is that in China, so much more works via personal relationships, but it's difficult to develop personal relationships over thousands and thousands of kilometers. Maybe one last thing before we have to wrap up. Just very briefly, one more aspect, which goes back to what we had said in the discussion. So on the one hand side, it seems to be that in the countries in which higher wages are paid packs would be manufactured, and the cells then are manufactured in Hungary or the Czech Republic. So it would be interesting to see what this division of labor is about. And the second aspect I wanted to mention is this. If you take a look at CATL, there are people who compare this to Amazon. So low wages, just above minimum wage, a very high fluctuation, rotation of staff. So I think there's a lot of work ahead for the scientific community as well as for the trade unions. Well, at this point in time, I would like to thank you all for this good discussion. I would like to thank everyone from the audience for this lively discussion at the end, and I look forward to continuing this outside over a cup of coffee for those that are here in presence.